Hi there, everyone. My name is Abigail Kahn, and this is my capstone presentation. This semester, I've decided to focus on the war on drugs for my capstone project. So, I've gone through and assessed some of the policies that we have in place today for drugs, as well as I've taken a look at the history and where the war on drugs started, where it came from, and how it has affected people in the real world. Not just in legislation, but also communities, marginalized groups, and so without further ado, let's discuss the table of contents. So, for starters, I'm going to give you some historical background to the war on drugs, where it came from, etc. And then I'm also going to shift into the modern day and what is happening now with social shift in perspective on drug abuse and drug use. Then we're going to talk about systemic oppression and how marginalized communities have been the most influenced by the war on drugs and the most negatively impacted. And then I'll share some final thoughts. So, first up is the historical background. So, the war on drugs was a phrase that was coined by Nixon during his presidency in 1971. He gave a speech in which he claimed drugs were America's public enemy number one. So it was believed that aggressive action was absolutely necessary in order to combat this, and this idea only intensified under Ronald Reagan's presidency. So incarceration and stigma really heavily influenced who was arrested, with Black people being more commonly arrested than anybody else for drug crimes. And there's a really interesting statistic here that shows that there are about 1 million arrests made every single year for drug-related crimes. The hope with their action that they wanted to take was to attack supply, so traffickers, and preventing drugs from coming in and out of the country. And then they also wanted to lower the purity of drugs, so that hopefully this would decrease abuse and prevent people from turning to drugs to begin with, because by attacking the supply and decreasing access to drugs, this makes drugs more expensive, and then lower purity makes drug addicts not want to do drugs, right? Well, it kind of backfired for them. As I'm sure most of you are aware, if you've been caught up on news at all, there's something going on right now called the fentanyl crisis, where a lot of commonly abused drugs, such as prescription pills, are being laced with fentanyl because it's cheaper for traffickers to produce and get into our country. So there are a much higher rates of overdose now than there were when the war on drugs was first announced. So this really backfired on Nixon and Reagan and their committees that were dedicated to the war on drugs. So next up, I want to talk about how there's been a modern social shift in societal thinking about the war on drugs and drug-related crimes. So, for starters, there is the Biden administration's goals, which have been to increase access to naloxone, which is an opioid overdose reversal medication. You might have known about it as being called Narcan. And so by increasing access to Narcan, we're lowering the rate of overall overdoses, death by overdoses in America. And by increasing the access to this, it is destigmatizing the need for them, which is both a good thing and a bad thing, because by destigmatizing it, we can offer people who are struggling with drug addiction help without them being scared to ask for help. But it is also, perhaps in a sense, kind of making it okay to do drugs, because there is access to Narcan that will save you in case you take it a step too far. The next goal of the Biden administration was to expand access to treatment. So think about rehab, methadone clinics, and therapies. And this is really great to try and expand access to healthcare for not just people who have money, but also for people who may be struggling with drug addictions. who don't have access to this type of healthcare. The third goal, which is not much different from before, is to disrupt drug trafficking. So by affecting the supply, you deplete the product, which reduces the access. By reducing the access, less people are able to have their hands on it, less people are able to overdose. And then the fourth and new goal from the Biden administration, and you can find all of this, it goes into further depth on the whitehouse.com or .gov. And their fourth goal, though, was to improve drug use data, so the collection of current and consistent drug use data. This is very important so that they are able to see what policies are working and what policies are not. They're able to see what groups are being affected the most, and maybe perhaps how to prevent this inequality within the war on drugs. So next I'm going to talk about that inequality. So I'm going to read you this quote from Nixon's domestic policy chief. It says, "The Nixon campaign did not intend the legislation to be about drug reform itself, but was instead meant to oppress the anti-war left and Black people." So who is impacted? Obviously, as I just stated with that quote, the Black community is disproportionately affected by the war on drugs. Black and Hispanic people are more likely to be incarcerated or charged with drug-related crimes than white people are, despite white people making up more of the population. And this does not mean that Black and Hispanic people do more drugs or are more likely to do drugs than white people. It just means that they're more likely to be incarcerated, which is where that systemic oppression comes in. Then we also have individuals. Individuals are affected by this. People die from overdosing every single day in America. Every single day, multiple people. Families are torn apart because of this. People become highly depressed and lose function as members in society. They're no longer to function properly within society. And then we also have to think about people who do things under the influence. This is also causing more deaths to happen with people being high and driving. It is not a great situation, and communities are also being affected by this, predominantly marginalized communities, but also just communities in general. But back to the marginalized communities, they're more likely to be neglected, targeted, and discriminated against than any other communities. And this is, again, another reason why the Black and Hispanic community are more likely to be incarcerated or charged with drug-related crimes because of the stigmatization against them within the system. So for some final thoughts, I think it's important to share that the focus needs to shift to rehabilitation and not criminalization. When we can take that stigma away and say that all drug addicts are criminals and put that criminal blame on the people who are trafficking these drugs and selling these drugs rather than the people who are using them, we can get people off of drugs. We can help heal addictions, and we can eventually, hopefully, create a future in which drug overdoses are not so prevalent in America. They're no longer a leading cause of death. So yeah, and that is what I found with my research. So thank you for watching, and if you're interested, here is my works cited list. So thank you very much, and everybody have a good one.